How's it going, everybody? Coming to you today from the driveway because we are going to be installing the Cogent Dynamics DDC kit into the TW200. Now this is going to be a specific install for the TW200, but this will translate over to a lot of different applications, a lot of different motorcycles. We're going to show how to disassemble, how to reassemble, and how to put this kit in your bike to really change the front end. So we're going to jump right into it. Stick around, learn how to do it. It's going to be quick, it's going to be easy. Let's get going. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at what comes in the kit. When you order the kit, you'll get your fork oil and the weight that you need for your application. For mine, it's 5 weight. You're going to get your pre-cut, preload spacers and the spring rate that you've ordered. I recommend contacting Cogent and asking them, going through their questionnaire, and they will get the right spring rate for your application. It's super quick, it's super easy. The guys there are really knowledgeable, and they can help you out a lot. They went through, asked me several questions on how to figure out the right spring rate and the right preload adjustment. Then you have your actual dampeners themselves. And don't ask me how these guys make the magic work, but these guys make the magic work. For all I know, Cogent put little elves in here, but your drop-in dampeners, and then some stickers and a roll of lifesavers. And that was everything that came in the kit. Now let's get installing it on the bike. Your first step is going to be to loosen up the top clamp of your triple tree, and on the TW it just happens to be a 10 millimeter, and you're just going to kind of break this guy loose. There you go. After you loosen the top clamp, the next step is to loosen the cap on your forks. If you skip this step, or if you wait and do it later, you're going to have a heck of a time getting that loose. So make for sure it is step number 2 to loosen the cap. On the TW, I believe it's a 19. I don't have one, so I'm using an adjustable wrench, and you'll just grab a hold of it and give it a couple of turns, make sure it's loosened up. You'll do this step on both sides. After you loosen the top clamp on each side and the cap on each side, you can go ahead and throw it up on your jack. Technically, you can put it on the jack before, but I don't like yanking around on the tight bolts when it's on the jack. It's just me personal. So my next step is I'm going to be sliding the jack underneath and getting the motorcycle front tire up in the air. Once you get the bike secured and stabled in the air to where the front tire will freely spin, your next step is going to be to remove the front tire. On the TW, you don't have a pinch bolt, you've just got your axle bolt that goes through, so you'll just remove your axle. If you have a pinch bolt on your application, you'll need to loosen up the pinch bolt to remove your front axle. So we're going to remove the front axle and remove the front tire. For the TW, I believe it's a 19 or a 20. Again, I don't have any sockets or wrenches in that size, so I'm using a set of adjustable wrenches, and I'll just hold on one side and loosen on the other. Once you remove your axle nut and washer, you can push your axle out from this side to the other. And then just slide your front wheel down and out. The next step will be different for your application unless you're running a TW200, in which case we're going to want to remove the 4 bolts that are holding on the fender and the fender brace, and then we'll want to remove the front fender. Depending on your application, yours may be bolted different. You'll just have to remove it according to your application, but for the TW200, this is what we've got. And if I forgot to tell you, this is the same, it's a 10 millimeter as well. Once you've removed your 4 bolts, you can kind of up and out and your front fender will come off. Next thing we got is here on the left hand side of the bike. You've got your cables that come down for your brake and for your speedometer. And we need to remove these from the fork because the fork is coming out, obviously. So we're going to start by removing the upper brace here, or the upper mount, and it is held in place with a 5 millimeter Allen key. And you'll just break these loose and remove them. And you can see how this mount now comes off. Down here, you've got a screwdriver bit, a Phillips JIS, to remove this plastic keeper. There's a nut held in place on the back of this plastic keeper, so make for sure it doesn't come out whenever you're taking this off. Take your screw out, and there's the mount. Next, you've got your 2 bolts that hold your brake caliper on. They're held in place with a 12 millimeter, and they're pretty snug. Before you fully remove both bolts, get you a piece of rope, twine, 550 cord, safety wire, baling wire, anything. You just don't want your brake caliper to just be hanging and possibly cause damage to the hose or to the connector. So before you remove the last bolt, have you something ready to where you can easily kind of hold this up. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. And as you can see, I just ran my little piece of rope through one of the bolt holes, up and over the turn signal, and I just have it held in place with a real light trucker's hitch type knot, so it'll be quick and easy to get out, and there's no weight actually being suspended on the brake cable, brake line, if you know what I mean. Okay, this next step you will do one at a time because this is the final step to remove your forks. You don't want to do both of them at the same time because then both forks will be loose. It's just easier to do one at a time. Right here and right here, your lower triple tree clamp, you'll want to loosen them. As you can see, I've got some lights here, so if you haven't put lights on yours, you can use a socket, get in there easier than I can. The lights kind of block it, so I have to use a wrench. So after you loosen up one, when you go to loosen up the next one, make for sure that you keep a hand on your fork down here or somewhere, because at this point in time the fork will be loose and it could slide down, and you don't want it to fall all the way down and hit the ground. Okay, you can see how the fork is wanting to come down now, so I'm just going to slide the fork right out. And now we're going to take this fork over. We're going to do this one at a time. We're going to take this fork over, remove the cap, remove the factory spacer, the factory spring, and drain all the factory oil out. That's the next step. Your next step is going to be remove your fork cap. Since we loosened it earlier, it ought to be pretty easy to come off. Just use whatever tool you use to loosen the cap, and it does have a little bit of upward pressure on it, so be prepared for that. It's not a lot. It's not like going to shoot out and put your eye out on the TW, but depending upon your application, there could be more pressure, so just be aware that it is under tension and it can shoot up depending on what type of bike you've got. Factory cap is removed. Factory spacer, preload adjuster, and then we're going to push down. There's a washer here. I don't know if you can see that or not. And then the factory spring. I've got a container here I'm going to be dumping the oil into. After you dump, you'll want to work it a couple of times, make sure you pump everything out. Now you're going to need to find somewhere where you can set this upside down for about 10 to 15 minutes so it can finish draining out all that old nasty oil. So as you can see, there is a huge difference between the factory springs and the Cogent springs. Just look at the size difference of the factory preload spacers compared to the Cogent preload spacers. And if I bring you down here closer, you can see there is quite a bit difference in the thickness of the spring as well. It really ought to improve the ride. I apologize about the lighting and about any audio issues. It started raining on me, so I had to come indoors so I could finish making the video. Our next step, after you've taken your fork that's been setting upside down for at least 15 minutes to drain out all the old oil, our next step is to install new oil for this application, 5-weight. Talk to Cogent and they will let you know which weight you need for your application. For the TW200, it's a 5-weight. And for the TW200, with the fork collapsed, you're going to measure from the top of the fork to the top of the fluid level. And it needs to be 160 millimeters or 16 centimeters or approximately 6 inches and 5/16 of an inch. I have a ruler that's in centimeters, but it won't fit inside my tube. So I'm going to be using my handy dandy tape measure. I've got it set at 6 and 5/16 of an inch. I will feed it down inside like that. And as soon as the end touches the fluid level, then I know I'm at the proper amount. So without further ado, we're going to make sure our fork is collapsed all the way. We're going to take our fork oil. This is what they sent me in my kit. It is the golden fork fluid in a 5-weight. And we are going to slowly fill this up until we hit 160 millimeters from the top. I've got just a little bit right on the tip. You can see when I wipe it, I get oil on my fingers. So that means I'm right at my mark. Now, what I want to do is I want to work the fork up and down to bleed any air that's in it, to burp the fork, bleed the fork, whatever you want to call it. But we want to get any trapped air out. So you're going to want to work it up and down and make for sure no trapped air is inside. Now, after you've bled your fork, burped your fork, whatever you want to call it, you're going to want to remeasure. Because if you did have air trapped in there, you're no longer going to be at the proper level. So double check your measurements. You can see I got just enough, it's about to drip off of there. So I didn't have much air in mine. You might in yours. So just take that extra step. You saw it only takes a second, and double check. The next step is after you have triple checked your fluid level and you've bled your fork, you're actually going to be installing the drop-in dampener. Now, for this application and for a few others, you can truly drop these in with no issue. For some applications, it requires a specialized tool because there's too much room inside your tube, and these, when you try to drop them in, can land sideways or upside down and not seat properly. You need them to seat properly to work properly. So again, for the TW200 and for a few other applications, these are a true drop-in. Contact Cogent and find out if you need that special tool to place these inside for your application. For the TW200, you don't need it. Once you've got your fork level oil set at 160 millimeters or 6 5/16 of an inch, you can take and drop this in. The thread and the nylock nut will go down. The hex head with just the hole in the center, that goes up. So you're just going to actually take and drop that in. You're then going to take and kind of pull up a little bit, give yourself some room. Take your new Cogent spring. You're going to slowly feed your Cogent spring in. Make for sure you don't cause any of your oil to come out, because then your oil level will be off. So go nice and easy. There we go. Perfect. You saw how that just slowly went in. You're going to take your factory washer that we took out earlier, and you're going to set that. Let's see if I can show it on camera. There's your spring. You're going to set it. Ooh, trying to show it on camera is kind of hard. You're going to set it straight on top of your spring. Going to take your pre-cut Cogent preload spacer, and you're going to put that on top. Now you can see you've got that little bit of preload right there, so that when you take your cap, you're going to have to kind of apply downward pressure as you try to screw your cap on. It's not going to be hard, but you're going to have to apply some downward pressure and turn. And you can see I got my thread started. It wasn't terrible. And you're going to take and just snug this up to where it won't leak. We're not actually going tight. We just don't want it to leak out any of the oil. Besides, you're probably not going to be able to get it really torqued down anyway by trying to hold it by hand. But I'm just going to run it down until it stops right there. And now your fork is complete. All you're going to do is repeat those exact same steps for your other fork, and now we're ready to install them on the bike. Okay, so after you have your forks rebuilt, the next step is just putting everything back the way you took it off. Slide your forks up through, and while holding upward pressure, just kind of tighten up. So that it don't fall. You can use, I'm using my knee to hold it with some slight upward pressure while I just kind of tighten these up enough to where it's not going to go anywhere. I'm not actually snugging everything up yet. I'm just getting it to where it'll hold the fork. So I'm not actually torquing anything down. Take your other side. Do the same thing. Slide it up to where it's supposed to be. And again, just kind of snug up your triple tree mount. Okay, so after you have your triple tree clamps just tight enough to hold everything, we're going to go back and attach everything to the forks that we took off. We've got our little mount here. We've got the brake caliper. And we've got the fender. And once we get all of that put back on, then we will start snugging everything down. once you get everything started and lined back up, you can go ahead and tighten this stuff down. You'll want to follow whatever your factory application specs are for torquing to torque down anything that you took off. I'm not going to say what those numbers are because each thing will be different. And honestly, I've got to look them up for the TW200 myself, but you'll want to make for sure that you have everything torqued back to factory specifications for whatever your application is. That's everything attached to the fork. We're going to put on the fender next, and remember that has those 4 10mm bolts holding it on. The rain is starting to pick up again, so I'm going to try to hurry up what's left of the install. If you took it apart, you should be able to put it back together. At least that's my philosophy on it. But your fender will come back on. Your 4 10mm bolts that are underneath. Okay, so once you have your fender on, you've got everything you've taken off of your forks put back on and tightened down. You can go ahead and tighten down your clamps. Again, we're not going all the way to true factory spec torque yet, but you can go ahead and really start getting these close to torque. So once you've got everything cinched down really good, last step is we're going to put the tire back on. Remember on your tire that you need to make sure your spacer and seal are properly seated for this side over here. And for the left-hand side, you'll want to make for sure that you get your speedometer cable plugged in properly where it goes there. Okay, axles all the way through. Okay, so after you have your axle through, everything's lined up, we're not going to torque it. We just want to get it a little over hand tight, because what we're going to do is we're going to true the front forks. And it's a simple process where we're going to get the bike off of the jack, going to bounce the front forks a little bit. You can either do it by holding the front brake and actuating the front forks. If you're not strong enough to do that, you can take and push the front end up against a wall, a tree, your fence, whatever you need, so that you can work that front end some, and that'll make for sure everything lines up and trues up, and then you can actually do your final torquing of everything. So I've got everything hand tight here. I'm ready to lower it and to true the forks. So as you can see, it was easy to do that. Just remove the jack, pump your brakes up a couple of times so that they re-engage, bounce it, and now we can do a final torque. That will conclude the install of the Cogent Dynamics DDC kit on the TW200. Every application is going to be slightly different. If you've got a different motorcycle, contact Cogent if you have any questions. Those guys, they're great. They'll help you. It's a super simple, quick install. The longest part of this, aside from filming, was waiting the 15 minutes for the oil to drain out of the tubes. It's a super simple install that will greatly enhance the front end of this bike. So now I'm going to go ahead and get my factory specs for my application. I'm going to torque for my application, and I will be done, and then I will show you what this thing rides like.